Hi, I'm Olivia McGlone, and I'll be completing the mandated reporter training about recognizing and reporting child abuse, neglect, and exploitation. So, by a show of hands, who is a mandated reporter? So, everyone should be raising your hand. If you're here today, you are a mandated reporter. So, why is mandated reporting so important? Children of all ages, races, and different cultural backgrounds and different economic backgrounds are vulnerable to abuse and neglect. Children with disabilities, including those with intellectual disabilities, emotional disabilities, learning disabilities, and physical health impairments, are particularly vulnerable to maltreatment due to factors such as isolation, dependency upon caregivers, family stressors, an inability to distinguish abuse from non-abusive acts due to impairments and difficulties with communication. Your role as a mandated reporter is critical in helping achieve safety, permanency, and well-being for the children in Massachusetts, and filing a report could save someone's life. In fact, 4 children die each day in the US from abuse and neglect. As you see in the graph, 84% of perpetrators are parents. Janet George referenced a relevant case, and we're going to watch a short video of a multi-system failure which led to the death of a 14-year-old boy, David Allman. You may have seen this case on the news. The perpetrators in this case were the boy's father and the father's girlfriend. Valerie, if you could please let me know if you can still see my screen.
Yes, right now I can see it, but I cannot see the video.
Okay. Can you see the video now?
Correct.
Perfect. Please let me know if you can hear it.
The state came out with a scathing report.
Yes.
Horrific death of a teenager in Fall River. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Lisa Hughes.
And I'm David Wade. Neglected and abused, the 14-year-old boy died in his father's custody. The report places much of the blame on local and state agencies that should have protected him, including the Fall River School Department. Our chief investigator, Cheryl Fiadaka, spoke with Fall River superintendent about what went wrong.
When David Allman died, he was 14 years old and weighed about 80 pounds. Fall River police found him in this Green Street home, emaciated, covered in feces, bruises, and cuts.
A house of horrors that was allowed to happen, and what these two people who were human beings were allowed to do to young kids.
Living with autism and developmental disabilities, David and his triplet brother, police say, were starved by their father, John Michael Allman, and his girlfriend, Jacqueline Marie Coleman. The pair got custody of the boys just as the pandemic started and enrolled them in Fall River Public Schools remote learning.
The parents were purposely logging on. We never had eyes on. They lied to us. We made contacts every week, and they gave us nothing but lies and deceit and stories, foolishly, because we're humans and we want the best. We believe them.
A new report by the Office of the Child Advocate says the school department and the Department of Children and Families, who were also involved with the family, both could have done more to protect the children.
It's tough to read. You never want to accept that we could have done more, but we could have done more.
Fall River has already implemented changes in protocol, including students must now have their cameras on for remote learning. A crisis team has been created to identify at-risk students and training for all staff to recognize the signs of abuse and neglect.
I failed my responsibility because this happened under my watch, so I'm responsible. This kid's dead. I got to live with that. But I can also make sure that we're doing more and more of making sure that we got eyes on and we're caring about kids 24/7, 365.
A third brother was not living in the home. Recently, prosecutors indicted the children's father and his girlfriend, charging them with second-degree murder and abuse and neglect of a disabled person. Cheryl Fiandaka, WBZ News.
Now, we did reach out to the DCF for comment. It referred us back to the Office of the Child Advocate. Lisa.
I'm just going to reshare my screen. So the Fall River case is a tragic situation, and David's death was preventable. 80% of all reports are made by teachers. During COVID, reporting dropped by 23%, and DCF believes the school closures attributed to much of the decline in reporting. If you'd like to read more up on the case, you can click the link Cases, and it will bring you to an article summary. Within the article summary, there's another link which brings you to the 107-page investigative report completed by the Office of the Child Advocate. And this is really why your job as a mandated reporter is so important and essential. Sorry. So first, we need to understand who is a mandated reporter and the legal obligations as a mandated reporter. Then we need to recognize what conditions are reportable. Next, we need to know how to file a 51A report. By a show of hands, who here has filed a 51A report? I see a few of you have. Lastly, we need to understand what happens after a 51A report is filed. So am I a mandated reporter? Anyone who suspects a child is being maltreated can and should file a 51A report with the Department of Children and Families, but mandated reporters are required by law to do so. Mandated reporters are all persons paid to care for or work with a child in any home or program funded by the Commonwealth. All program staff, including providers, support brokers, autism clinical managers, are mandated reporters. If you are here today, you are a mandated reporter. As a mandated reporter, you are part of the safety net entrusted with protecting the children in our community. By the very nature of our work, we may be the first ones to be told or see signs of abuse and neglect. Oh, sorry. So duties of a mandated reporter. So what are the duties? Sorry, I jumped one slide. Duties of a mandated reporter. Mandated reporters are required to file a 51A report with the Department of Children and Families if they have reasonable cause to believe a child under the age of 18 is suffering from one or more of the following reportable conditions: neglect, including maltreatment, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, financial exploitation, physical dependence upon an addictive drug at birth, being a sexually exploited child, being a human trafficking victim. It is not your job to investigate. If you suspect that one of these conditions, you need to file a 51A. Your employer cannot retaliate against you if you file a 51A report in good faith. In addition to filing with DCF, mandated reporters may also contact local law enforcement authorities and/or the child advocate about the suspected abuse or neglect. If you have reasonable cause to believe a child has died as a result of a reportable condition, you must notify the local district attorney for the county where the child occurred and the office of the chief medical examiner. So there's links here on this slide which directs you to the local district attorney and the chief medical examiner. Failure to do so is a crime punishable by a fine up to $1,000. If a mandated reporter fails to file a 51A report when required, it is also a fine up to $1,000. Lastly, it is a crime punishable by imprisonment in jail for not more than 2.5 years and/or fine up to $5,000 to willingly fail to file a 51A report when a mandated reporter has knowledge of a child abuse or neglect that resulted in either a serious injury or a death of a child. So now we know the duties of a mandated reporter. The next step is to recognize reportable conditions. Does anyone have a question? Does anyone have a guess of what type of maltreatment is reported the most? For example, the types of maltreatment is neglect, including malnutrition, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, financial exploitation, physical dependence upon an addictive drug at birth, being a sexually exploited child, being a human trafficking victim. You can put your answers in the chat group, or you can unmute yourself and say it out loud.
Neglect is coming through on the chat.
Thank you. So, neglect is actually the #1 cause of child maltreatment. Now, what is neglect? So neglect is the failure by a caregiver to take those necessary actions to provide a child with minimally adequate food, clothing, shelter, medical care, supervision, emotional stability and growth, or other essential care, including malnutrition. Neglect can be deliberate or through negligence or an inability, but it cannot be due solely to inadequate economic resources or because of the existence of a handicap condition. Also, injury is not a necessary component of neglect. For example, failure to provide a child with basic hygiene would not inflict immediate injury, but over time could lead to a variety of infections. As a mandated reporter, you are not required to wait until the child's lack of hygiene has led to an infection or disease before filing a 51A. Other potential indicators may include lack of appropriate clothing for weather. You could also go into the home environment and it is unsanitary or unsafe. For example, there could be drugs, chemicals, or paraphernalia accessible to the child. When a caregiver's use of substance interferes with their ability to meet the child's basic physical, social, emotional, medical, or safety needs, it qualifies as neglect. Also, the child could have a lack of medical or dental care. The child may beg or steal food or money. They could have a lack of supervision. The child may be frequently late or absent from school. Parents and guardians are legally responsible for ensuring that a child in their care attends school as required by law. Student tardiness and truancies are indicators that a student may be experiencing stress or other difficulties in his or her life. Does anyone have any other examples they want to add? You can use the chat box or you can unmute yourself. So another example that I could think of is frequent hospital visits may be a cause of concern or failure to seek medical attention for an obvious wound or injury. So the next one is recognizing physical abuse. Physical abuse is a non-accidental injury. An accidental would be the child was injured during normal child's play. A non-accidental injury indicators include bruising, welts, or burns that cannot be sufficiently explained. Unusual bruising patterns that reflect the shape of an instrument used to cause injury, for example, the shape of a belt. Physical injury, such as a fracture of a bone, hitting with a hand, fist, foot, or object, shoving, tripping, pushing, pulling, scratching, pinching, cutting, or biting, shaking a child hard enough to cause injury. The next one is recognizing sexual child abuse. Sexual child abuse is engaging in a non-accidental sexual acts with a child that causes harm or substantial risk of harm to the child's health or welfare. Sexual child abuse can be physical, verbal, or written. Indicators may include recurring pain or itching in private parts, frequent bladder or urinary tract infections, genital injury, including bruising and tearing, premature sexual knowledge, language, or behaviors, not wanting to be left alone with a particular individual, wearing multiple layers of clothes, and fire setting. The next one is recognizing financial exploitation. Financial exploitation is the illegal or improper use of another person's funds, property, or assets by a person in position of trust. So who commits financial exploitation? Family members, significant others, paid and unpaid caregivers, and more. Our kiddos may be unable to report due to being dependent on caregivers. They may have limited communication skills and may want to please caregivers by giving them money and other resources. Parents know their children's personal information that is needed for many financial products, such as name, address, social security number, and birth date. Most parents do not financially abuse their children maliciously, but parents may have financial difficulties that may influence them to take desperate measures to obtain liquid assets. For example, a parent may apply for consumer goods like a cell phone in the child's name, and then they don't pay the bill, which goes to collections under the child's name. Or a parent who's in the country illegally, or a parent who may have a criminal background may start by using the child's social security number to gain employment. The social security number of the child can then be used to get a driver's license, set up utility bills, and bank accounts. Some of our children receive supplemental security income, or SSI. SSI money must be spent on the child's maintenance, which means food, housing, clothing, medical care, and personal needs. SSI can be spent on copays for medication or medical expenses that are not covered. If there is leftover money after taking care of the child's basic minimum needs, the payee parent can also spend money on recreational expenses that benefit the child, such as sport lessons, tutoring, movie tickets, or special camps. They can also set aside a small amount of money in a savings account, such as an ABLE account. The designated person controlling the child's SSI funds cannot use the funds for their own personal expenses, or funds, or spend funds in a way that could leave the child without necessary items or services. When you are in the house or video calling the parent, it is important to pay attention to physical, environmental factors and personal well-being of the child and caregiver and other members in the environment. It is important to observe your surroundings and the people you are talking to. This is how we assess the safety of the children and the needs of their family. For example, have there been any physical and/or behavioral changes to the child? Maybe the child has unhealthy weight loss or weight gain, bruises on the body, cigarette burns, rope burns. Is the child dressed appropriately? Has the child's behavior changed? Does the child act frightened around the parents? Has the child's aggressions increased? These are all important to be aware of. It's also important to pay attention to changes of the caregiver. For example, is the caregiver having weight loss to an unhealthy degree? Is the caregiver having a decline in their personal hygiene? Do they have bloodshot eyes? Are they offering inappropriate explanations for the child's injury? Also, has the child had any recent doctor's appointments or trips to the ER, calls to the mobile crisis unit? When was the last time the child went to the doctors? When was the last time they went to the dentist? How often is that mobile crisis unit being called? Is there any evidence of infestation in the home, like rats or bed bugs? Is there any drug paraphernalia like needles, empty alcohol bottles, glass pipes in the home? Any safety concerns in the home, like windows with no screens, or sharps, poison, or firearms stored improperly? Reasonable suspicion can be based on a disclosure by a child, a statement, or a perpetrator. information from a third party, or your own observations, knowledge, or experience. When someone, sorry, I'm not sure what is playing. Is everyone muted or is that me?
I believe all are muted. Let me mute all again. And you will have to take yourself off of mute, Olivia, okay? Hang on.
Sorry, it was the YouTube that I had earlier that just started playing. Okay. Apologize about that. Okay. Okay. So when someone does disclose information, ask for clarification rather than assuming information. Do not ask leading questions. If a child says, "Daddy hurt me," you should ask, "Can you tell me what Daddy did?" Do not ask leading questions like, "Did Daddy hit you with his belt?" During a home visit in the community, staff should leave immediately if you feel like there is imminent danger to yourself or anyone in the home. After leaving the home, you should immediately call 911. If there are concerns about the safety in the home, DCF should be notified. You should then report your concerns to the autism clinical manager. When in doubt, report. How to file a 51A report. You must file an oral report immediately and a follow-up written report within 48 hours. During business hours, you can call the local DCF office covering the city/town the child lives in. During evenings, weekends, and holidays, you must call the State Child at Risk Hotline at 1-800-792-5200. Massachusetts General Law 51A requires mandated reporters to file a report with DCF if they have reasonable cause to believe a child is being abused. So these links direct you to the local area office, and it also directs you to HCSIS. What happens after 51A is filed? The department will investigate cases where abuse or neglect has been inflicted by or caused by a person responsible or entrusted by the child's health, welfare, or care, or by a person giving access to the child by a person responsible. DCF should take steps to protect the child, including investigating the allegations, offering services to the child and his or her family, taking custody of the child when necessary, notifying the local district attorney, and notifying other state agencies. As a mandated reporter, you must answer questions and provide information requested by DCF. If there is a concern for the child's immediate health and safety, an investigation and evaluation of the information reported will begin within 2 hours of initial contact and will be completed within 24 hours. All other reports will begin within 2 working days of initial contact and should be completed within 10 calendar days. DCF may close a case believing issues are resolved. If you see issues arising again, you should file a new 51A, and DCF may no longer be aware of the family's needs further intervention. Therefore, you need to file a new 51A report. DCF's first priority is to safely stabilize and preserve families. If that is not possible, children may be removed temporarily, and DCF's priority changes to safely reunify the family. When children are placed outside of the home, DCF supports parents as they develop skills and resources that will help them keep their children free from abuse and neglect. If that also fails, children may be permanently removed, and DCF's priority will change to creating a new, safe, and permanent family for the child. If you have any questions or concerns about a case, please call the Autism Clinical Manager on the case. Your role as a mandated reporter is critical in helping achieve safety, permanency, and well-being for the children in Massachusetts. And again, filing a report could save someone's life. Now we have a fun pop quiz. So you can use the chat feature to type in your answer. So which of the following may be considered a form of child neglect by a parent? A, failure to provide insulin to a child with diabetes. B, failure to provide school supplies due to cost. C, threatening to kill your spouse in front of your child. D, A and C only.
We have all D's popping in on the chat.
Great. The answer is D, A and C only. A failure to provide school supplies solely due to lack of economic resources does not qualify as neglects. We have more questions coming through. Please, again, use the chat feature. So, do I have to file a 51A report if I know DCF is already involved with the family? Please type in the chat either yes or no.
Yes.
Great. The answer is yes. A new 51A report needs to be filed for every new incident of maltreatment, even if DCF is already involved in providing services to the family. Number 2, Xander lives with his parents, Kathy and Joseph. Joseph makes threats to kill Kathy. Kathy fears for her safety. Do you file? Please answer yes or no.
We have some yeses popping through.
Perfect. Yes, you should file when the alleged perpetrator makes threats to kill the caretaker, children, or him or herself, and the caretaker fears for his or her safety. Last question. Will my name be protected as a mandated reporter? Yes or no?
We have more yeses coming through on the chat.
So,
and a no. And a no.
So a mandated reporter's name is protected from disclosure unless ordered by a court. So this does not mean that the family will not figure out that you have filed or ask if you've filed. If you feel comfortable, you can tell the family you are required by law to file. If you do not feel comfortable, you are under no obligation to inform the family you filed. However, in some situations, this may be advisable and can provide you an opportunity to help the family understand what you expect. Now we have a scenario. So Sandra is 6 years old. She is receiving supplemental security income SSI. During your visit, you notice that Sandra's clothes are too small and have several holes. You also notice that there is a new furniture in the apartment. You comment on the furniture and inquire if she used a furniture bank in the area. Sandra's mother reports that she used a portion of Sandra's SSI to furnish her new apartment. Sandra's mother feels that she doesn't really need all that money anyways. What do? You can either type your answer in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself.
So Alex says talk to my ACM, and a few others are saying file.
Those are good answers. Definitely talk to your ACM and file. The mother should not be using Sandra's SSI money to furnish her apartment. This is a form of financial exploitation and you should file. Now we have a scenario where you enter a home and this is your environment that you enter. What are the concerns? There are several concerns in this picture. So you can please either enter the chat box or you can unmute yourself to answer one of the concerns.
Deb says safety regarding the stove. Electrical wire too low, hands on the stove, sharp object in hand of child, child playing with a knife, unsafe electronics, dangling cord, hot liquid high up. Poison within reach, chemicals, stove, knife, cord, in high chair without supervision, knife in child's hands, kids near the stove, lack of supervision, in unsafe situation, kids pulling wire with chemicals out. And we've got lots of repeats now, so.
Perfect. Yep, those are very good answers. All the toxic cleaning supplies and other chemically based products should be kept out of reach in top drawers and shelves. You know, they can use the back burners and turn the handles of the pots and pans inwards so that no one can grab them. You can also buy knob covers and stove guards that help prevent toddlers from turning on the burners themselves. These are all very good answers and concerns that should be brought up to the ACM, and these are, you know, high potenting concerns that need to be addressed. So great job with your answers. Here are some additional resources. So we have the 51A training offered by the Middlesex Child Advocate Center. That is the link to the training that should be taken every single year. We have the DCF publications that goes in detail about how to report abuse and neglect. And then again, we have the Department of Children and Families at Risk hotline at 1-800-792-5200. Does anyone have any questions before Janet jumps in and talks about the comments on life transitioning to our new normal?
So Olivia, there was a question a little earlier on in the chat. I'm just scrolling back up to it. The question was, how do we follow up with our report to DCF or the 51A if DCF doesn't provide the mandatory investigation finding report to us?
You can call DCF, or I would call the your autism clinical manager, and we can help assist you with that process.
And I think that was the only question that was not answered.
Can I back in for just 1 second? I think it's really important that we continue to work together. You know, there are a lot of references to the brokers, you know, bringing issues to the ACM, and I think certainly anytime you have that concern, that should happen. Just making sure it's abundantly clear, though, you don't need our permission to file with DCF. You are the mandated reporter, just like we are. I know there's a lot of gray sometimes with the kids that we work with. You know, thinking about some of the situations, you know, the extreme changes in behavior. I have worked with kids who have extreme changes in behavior when the seasons change. You know, so sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. We have kids who don't communicate well, so they may not be able to say what's going on. So it just sometimes I think it's more complex, and I certainly don't want to discourage conversation when you aren't sure if it is something that's fileable or not. Certainly not my point here. Just making sure you understand, like I said, you don't need our permission to file. If you know that it clearly has, you know, passed that line, you can go right ahead and file. And certainly, yes, please keep us in the loop. But like I said, not a required check first with us.
We did just have another question come in from Alex. So do you need to tell them you are a mandated reporter if the case you are reporting is not one you have a professional relationship with?
Does one of the other ACMs want to jump in?
So, oh, good. Janet, you got it?
Janet, you're muted.
Sorry.
I wanted to make sure I understood what the question was. So you're a citizen and you observe something that is a reportable condition? Is that the question?
Yeah, if this happened, so I had personal knowledge of something not related to work. I reported it, DCF didn't do anything. But I don't know if I said that I also have a professional capacity, if that would have encouraged them to take it more seriously. I don't know.
To be honest, if you observe something as a citizen, your obligation independently is to report, because if you're silent, then that really compromises children's well-being. You don't have to tell that individual that you reported, but you ought to report. If you see something, say something, do something. That's really the watchword here. The other thing for the brokers here is not only do you not need the permission of the ACMs or the department, you have a personal professional responsibility. You do not need permission from your supervisor. The risk on the penalty side for not reporting is yours. So it's important that you talk to your supervisor in the agencies that you work for. But if you see something, again, you need to report. And oftentimes, this is on the DCF side, you may have to report multiple times for really similar related conditions. You need to keep doing it. Just think of it ultimately, where there's smoke, there's fire. And sometimes that's what it takes to get DCF to take filings that are done on behalf of kids with disabilities more seriously. And that's just an unfortunate reality at the moment.
Jenna, you're a little bit quiet, and because I know you're taking on these last couple, I just wanted to point out, sorry.
Oh, no, fine.
There you go. Oh, that's much better. Thank you.
So are there other questions about mandatory reporting?
So one just came in that says a lot of times, especially in COVID, we get secondhand information from providers. They receive the training, but is there an in-depth training that we can offer them?
The 51A training offered by the Middlesex Children Advocacy Center goes over an entire training for mandated reporting. And I can send out this PowerPoint after to everyone, so everyone has all these additional resources and links.
And then there's nothing else in the chat as of now.
Okay.
I have one question, sorry. A little more complicated than typing. If a parent reports neglect of a school or abuse from a school, obviously we would encourage the parent to file, but do we then also file because it has been reported to us by the parent?
I would also file.
You should file. In fact, during COVID, there has been an increasing number of filings against schools. We've had a number of those within the program in which the school paid no attention to the fact that a child never signed on, was never available, absent for months and months of school. So yes, and those are investigated differently by DCF because they're actually institutional abuse issues. But if you know about that, you should file.
And then a follow-up for that, if the school if you do not hear from DCF regarding the investigation, seeing that it's done differently, if you do not hear about the progress on that, would you then reach out to your clinical manager to follow up on that?
I would do that, and I would also talk to DCF again. I think if you want to really grasp the systemic flaws that led to David Ammon's death, you should really read the Office of the Child Advocate's report. It is damning about all of the systemic failures for that young man. So this presentation, go ahead. Was someone going to say something?
I think you're all set, Janet.
Okay. So it's a really nice lead in to talking about transitioning to whatever our new normal is. So the last 15, 16 months has been incredibly difficult for everyone. Difficult for families, difficult for all of you. Some of you have been impacted directly by COVID. Some of you may have lost family members. Some of the families we serve have had COVID. Our entire worlds have been turned upside down. Now we're, at least in this state, turning the corner. It's clearly not true across the country, given the Delta variant in areas where there's not a lot of vaccinations going on. But in this state, we've done pretty well. We're close to a little bit more than 60% of the population has been vaccinated, which has really allowed the Commonwealth to begin to open up businesses and begin to return to normal. That being said, we don't know what some of these families have done, because within the group of families that we serve, we have people that are anti-vaxxers, we have people that are COVID deniers, we have people who are simply afraid to do much of anything in terms of leaving their house. So notwithstanding all of that, we are really beginning to return to normal. The emphasis that we just did on filing and mandatory reporting was in large measure due to the death of David Ammon. And one of the things that the Commonwealth wants now is it wants eyes on children in a way that was potentially not as explicit before. Because one of the failures in the Ammon case was, as you heard from the superintendent in Fall River, they actually never saw this young man on the screen. The mother, the stepmother, girlfriend, whatever she was, had an enormous number of excuses about why he wasn't actually being seen. So in response to both that and the changes during COVID, when our waiver was renewed in October, one of the things that CMS wanted was they wanted to know more explicitly that there were eyes on the children, not the family, but on the child, him or herself. So to that end, the autism clinical managers are going to see face-to-face in real time children every 6 months at the beginning and then 6 months later. Additionally, we are going to be more explicit about the need for the brokers to actually see children. Again, not the families. You still need to see the families, but to actually see the child, preferably in the child's environment every other month. So this is a change in practice, which is really driven by both the changes in our waiver as well as the report from the Office of the Child Advocate. So this represents a change in our respective practices, both the ACMs on the department side and all of the brokers. So this is a scheduling change. This requires potentially that you see that family more than once at a time, because typically when you're doing your quarterly meetings, as an example, the child should be in school. That means you're going to need to organize your time to see this child, and again, preferably at home. Now, the overlay of COVID presents a different kind of challenge, which is some of these families may not be willing at this point to let you in their home. You also, given who some of these families are and their unwillingness or their current practices, you may not be comfortable being in their home. So it's not as though we can absolutely mandate go forth, go into their homes, regardless of your own personal safety. Which leads me to the second point here, which is some of the families live in places and neighborhoods which are inherently dangerous. So we want you to be street smart, really street smart. Pay attention to your surroundings, not leave your belongings in cars. Let your colleagues, your supervisor know where you're going to be, because infrequently, but sometimes with a very poor outcome, people get hurt who have jobs like yours. So we want you to pay attention to your own personal safety, but we want you to know that we want to increase the amount of actual eyes on contact that we have with children. And this is going to be a work in progress. It's not necessarily something that is easy to implement, but the requirement to actually see the children that we're supporting. Because remember, these are young kids. Some of them are nonverbal. What is the likelihood a 3 or 4-year-old who is nonverbal on the spectrum is going to be able to alert you to a potential problem, which is really the concrete way that we need to have eyes on kids. So are there questions about this?
There's nothing in the chat.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So during COVID, if we have a family who is resistant to resume in person or even later on as we move forward, can the visual eyes on of the child be over Zoom or no?
Well, so this is a minuet, right? You can't force people to allow you into their homes. So yes, obviously a fallback is Zoom. Clearly not preferable. Clearly not going to be a long-term solution. As you know, Chris, some of the kids have done better with telehealth, and some of them have done considerably worse. So over time, we need to be in people's homes, but we're going to have to overcome people's resistance to letting us in.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to see, to be honest, we're going to see the same thing around school, right? Schools are going to go back in session late August, September. We're going to have families that are going to say they're not sending their children to school. And over time, that's going to be a problem. It's going to be a reportable condition if they choose not to send their kids to school and they don't have an approved homeschool program by the district. So the entire system is now moving towards a greater sense of normality, but also more eyes on children, whether it's in schools or in family homes, in doctors' offices, etc.
So there's a question in the chat. Are there virtual options for the months that we are not, or for the months that are not eyes on months?
Yes.
For the brokers?
Yes. But again, you want to see people, right? You need to say to people, we want to see you on the screen. We want to have a sense of the panorama of where you're at. You don't want people just on the phone or the screen blank. Because again, some of those reportable conditions are really the domestic violence ones. If you don't see the parent, you're not going to see that either.
And so I think as many of us have families on our caseloads that have resisted Zoom calls with us, you know, those are the ones we're going to have to, you know, chat about, brainstorm about, you know, how are we going to go about, you know, nicely insisting, you know, but I think that's going to be on a case by case basis, you know, with, you know, brokers, supervisors, you know, clinical managers. You know, I can think of a couple, you know, that we're going to need to kind of talk about. But I think that, and we'll talk about this later, but we have updated the monthly broker meeting checklist, kind of to add some of these changes too. So we're not forgetting that, you know, documenting how did we see the child? Was it a telehealth call? Was it in person? You know, were you in the home, but the child wasn't there? You know, just little checks that we can document that information, and we'll send that out to you folks later. But then also kind of a cheat sheet to tag team what Olivia talked about in terms of, the personal well-being of people, in the home, in the environment. And again, that's we've kind of tweaked the broker monthly checklist, and we can get that out to folks later. And if you guys have any suggestions too, feel free and let us know about that.
So really, the return to these visits in many ways is about strengthening and building rapport with families. We're not saying go in with the heavy hand of the law and insist that we're going to force our way into people's homes, but it is about building and renewing those relationships and helping people overcome their concerns. And for some of these folks, it will take some time. But we wanted to make sure that the expectation about Eyes On was clear for all of you. Other thoughts or questions about this?
I had one following up to what Mary was saying, and also what you were saying about building rapport and not coming in and just like insisting. How would you best suggest that we mitigate the difference between the resistance due to concerns with health with COVID versus the lack of enthusiasm with families having us in their home again because we are mandated reporters?
I think that over the course of the summer is really the opportunity to really begin to kind of move families towards those in-person visits, because in the fall there's going to be school, and if you're sending your child to school, that's another environment in which there's a public facing side to it. So I think that you should think about over the summer, because that's certainly true on the department side. It's sort of a slow return to whatever the new normal is going to look like. And I would imagine that's true in the agencies as well, since we've all been through a fairly horrific 15 months. And I think when we get to the fall, we'll have a better idea what people's level of concern is, whether it's really about COVID still. Is it about they really don't want services or not? And then we'll have to think about what we're going to do next.
There's a question in the chat of, are we moving away, or brokers moving away from weekly contact at this point, or are we still continuing that for the time being?
We are still continuing that for the time being. The level of isolation that people have experienced in the last 15, 16 months is pretty extraordinary. And so that regular contact matters. For some people, that's the only contact they've had outside of their own family home. So we want to continue that for a while. Other questions? So we have an additional training that we have scheduled for July 20th, right? I have the date right? And at that point, we're going to talk in more depth about the service planning processes that we think should change, the broker checklist that Mary just referenced, and then come back to whether there are any outstanding questions about some of the service changes that we're making, rate contracts. So, but again, we'll want you to put that on your calendars for the 20th of July, because we want to make sure that we keep you apprised of what the changes are, hear from you about what are the challenges that you're experiencing now as we try to get back to some level of whatever the new normal is going forward.
Janet, we have one more question in the chat.
Okay.
If we are going into a home, should we be masking regardless of vaccination status?
Oh my goodness. So we we are not the CDC authorities, we are not the DPH authorities, and we are not the police for any of that. So I think the decision that you make has to be the one that you feel comfortable, because I'm going to assume that most of you, if not all of you, were vaccinated, and it's really what you and your agency feels is a responsible way to proceed. You certainly don't need PPEs, you don't need face shields. Whether or not you want to wear a mask, from my perspective, is up to you relative to what the guidance is from DPH and the CDC at this point. I would, if I were in your shoes, I'd want to know what, if possible, and people do not have to tell you what the vaccination status is of the families where you're going. Because remember, any of the younger kids are by definition not going to be vaccinated. So depending on whether you are or you are not, there's a different level of risk to you. And I would imagine that for some of these families, they did not get vaccinated, let alone their children.
I think if that is the last of the questions, we have just, I'm going to share a couple of business keeping things here in a second. But I think if we're all set, Valerie, you can stop the recording now.